12 chairs. And his original idea was that they would work as ghostwriters for him. And then he will edit it with his skill and talent, and will publish under his own name. So they started writing and showed him several chapters, and he said, "Oh no, you guys, you can write on your own. Just dedicated to me." So every edition since then, of the 12 chairs, I'm talking about the 12 chairs, was dedicated to him. So the 12 chairs was published in 28 and became an instant success. And they started writing the Golden Calf as already well-known and popular writers.
Do you know anything about how they work together? I mean, it's difficult to pull together a novel with two people. I mean, how do they manage that?
They wrote about it several times, but it's hard to believe what they wrote about themselves. For one thing, they never lived together. They had their own families, they had their own children, they had their own either rooms or apartments, but they were spending a lot of time together, about 10 hours a day together. They were walking around central Moscow, and then there are lots of pictures of them sitting at the same table across from each other, writing with those pens that had to dip in an inkwell, obviously. Nobody can tell what was written by Ilf and what was written by Petrovs. So apparently, at least as far as the novels are concerned, they really worked together. And even though they remained very courteous, like they until the very end, they addressed each other with, they put on the French vous rather than tu. On occasion, apparently, they yelled at each other on top of their lungs. So, of course, which justified our contentions were on the translation. But later they said, a book of nonfiction that they published after the novel, The Single Story America, there they wrote separately. But until then, they really sat at the table together and wrote together.
The novel has so much to say about Russian life, and I was kind of wondering what it means to Russians, and if it still has resonance today. I mean, is it something that's still fairly widely read, as far as you know?
In our highly unscientific estimate, this is one of the 3 most popular 20th century Russian novels. The other 2 being The 12 Chairs, which is probably more popular than The Calf, and Bulgakov's Master and Margarita. A researcher at the University of Chicago counted dozens of editions coming from different parts of the country. At least 10 million copies over the 80 years, but that's a very conservative estimate. There were 2 movies in 68 and in 93. There was an opera in 85. There was a TV miniseries in 2006, starring one of the leading contemporary Russian actors. There's hardly anybody who either hasn't read it or at least heard about the 2 novels.
Has there been, I'm sorry, were you going to say something?
Kostya had an interesting story this morning about walking into was it a shoe repair shop in Moscow, where the older woman and the young man were arguing about money. What's more important in life? Is money the most important thing? And somehow they ended up talking about...
Well, because of me.
Yeah.
I asked the young guy whether he read Ilf and Petrov, and actually he said no, but it's on my list, he said. And the older woman said, you absolutely have to do it. The very first book stand, I was in Moscow in February, the very first book stand where I stopped had a copy of the as far as the popularity is concerned. There's a statue of one of the characters, Panikovsky, in the middle of Kiev, at the very intersection where in the novel, I think it's chapter 12, he's pretending to be a blind man. There's a statue of 4 main characters in their car in Odessa. There are statues of Bender all over the place in Moscow and St. Petersburg. But of course, Bender is a character in both novels, in both the 12 Chairs and the Golden Castle. Sometimes it's hard to tell which particular novel they refer to.
So Chad mentioned the story, sort of how the publication came about, but I was wondering what made you guys want to take this project on? Like, had this something that occurred to you before to do, or was it once Chad approached you, you decided to take it on, or was it something you'd sort of been thinking about? Like, I wish there would be a better English version of this book.
Well, we wouldn't have done it if Jen hadn't asked us, but I knew that it was one of Konstantin's favorite books, and as a student, we studied it in college. I have a BA in Russian studies, and we studied it from the point of view of difficulties of translation. So our professor knew that the Russian text was very hard for English speakers, for students to read. It's full of a lot of very arcane references and bits of jargon and so on. And then at the same time, the translations are the language, it's humorous, the language is somewhat dated, and so on and so forth. And so Kostya would say, every couple of years he'd say, have you read the 12 Chairs yet? Have you read the Golden Calf yet? And I would, kind of retreat to the library and look at the Russian again and look at the original, and I could never really get into it. So I thought, here's our chance to really do something.
Actually, when Helen first mentioned this to me, I thought, no way. It's too difficult. There's too much there. All the humor, the little poems, the word games, what have you. And then I looked at the translation that Chad mentioned, and I thought, we can do sometimes better than that. And it was a great pleasure, because this book is a lot of fun. So translating it was a lot of fun too.
What sort of goal did you have in mind in translating? I know that people can approach things from a different perspectives. Like, what were you trying to do with your translation? Who were you trying to reach, I guess?
We wanted to reach, the average person. This was an incredibly funny, incredibly popular book in Russia, and we wanted to make it accessible to people, to English speakers.
And did you, I guess, refer both to the older translations, but also to any scholarship that was surrounding the books? I mean, there's a lot that's been written about it in Russian. I mean, you had a guide, yeah?
We felt we had to, because it's a classic, so you have to be particularly careful. So there were, 2 doctoral dissertations, 4 or 5 books, a whole bunch of articles, and also the last 20 years or so, the publication of 3 or 4 books of commentaries, page-by-page commentaries to the novel. Actually,